How does culture influence expenses? This is something I find I have to explain to every new group that I run into. And I think it's a very important conversation because it's not so obvious how exactly a culture of a company can influence the expenses of a company. And a lot of people misunderstand what culture means. Of course, we can fall into the trap of free pizza, ping pong tables, and all of this stuff. I don't think a lot of people really truly believe that's what culture is. I think it's what a lot of people try to put a band-aid measure over. But there is a direct relationship between culture and expenses, and I will show you exactly how that works and what that does for us and how we can even change those things. So a model I like to use when thinking about this problem is starting with the Dunbar numbers. And the Dunbar numbers are a way for us to think about how groups of people form circles of trust. So these Dunbar numbers have, and they're not precise, right? There's a directionality to these that are true. And you can find examples of this throughout all of human history, right? So in the ancient Roman armies, you would have, a squad of a few soldiers that report to a larger unit and a larger one, and eventually you would get an entire legion. Now, those numbers are not the Roman legion, but you had this directionality of small people who trust each other and know each other a lot, and then they belong to a larger group of people they don't know everybody in, but they serve a common purpose. Now, we have this as well as we go through companies, right? We have small teams of people who belong to, larger groups, tribes, hives, swarms, things like this, who often belong to a slice of a business unit who then belong to the overall company. Now, there's a cost that is implied in here, right? So there's a few things. First of all, every layer that you have to go down this hierarchy is introducing a middle management cost, right? So every single one of those layers, you have a middle manager, and not just one middle manager, but actually multiple. You might have one layer of management here between the top of the company and the next, but if you have, a 150 person company down here, you might have 10 managers, right? Potentially. So that's the first kind of extra cost in here, right? So you have the middle management. Now, one might ask, well, why do we need all those layers? Why can't we just simply put, 2 to 4 people, get rid of that small group and start with 15? And I think that's quite interesting. The challenge here is that this is really not about how we've designed a document in our company that explains how people form relationships and what teams they're assigned to. This is a discussion about how do people form trust with each other to move very quickly and efficiently at getting work done. So in some companies, you might only be able to reach a trust size of 2 to 4 people. However, potentially in a larger company, that might be something like 5 to 8 people, or even in a smaller company, you might be able to do that, right? And so this is something to think about is there's something that differentiates that smallest group of people who can form trust bonds with one another so they can move quickly. And there's something that makes them different from a group that can trust 5 to 8 people. So that's your first cost, is not about your organizational design, but whether or not your trust circles that are created inside of your organization are efficient. So that's the first thing. The second thing here is your operational costs and flow. So let's say you decided, that's it. My smallest group of teams will be 15, and you force them into this environment. You've put them into an environment where they do not have that fundamental level of trust, right? So if they don't have that fundamental level of trust, your flow through the organization, the value they work on, is going to be decreased. All kinds of strange little arguments will come up, and things just won't get done very quickly. Now, that has a direct hit onto your operational efficiency, right? So if before you could produce 100 widgets, you can probably only produce, 70 now. You're still paying the same amount of people. You're just, your yield for your operational work is reduced. Now, in this company over here on the right, I think we would have a different case, right? So you could have 5 to 8 people. So you might not need In this case, I said we had 10 managers. If this company existed and you still had 150 at the top, you might only need, half as many, right? You might only need 2 layers of hierarchy instead of 4, because you can expand those trust boundaries. Now, the third thing that's influenced here, and that's directly going to hit your costs, is your agility, right? And I don't mean agile as in Scrum or scaled agile or using Jira or Kanban. I mean dictionary definition, look it up. It just means how quickly can you jump and change direction. And this has a real impact on us, right? If you come out with a new strategy for the quarter, we will have here, 150 person organization that has to go through 1, 2, 3 levels of management hierarchy, trickle down the message, or no bonds between these people and these people, and they try to jump down. These people don't have those trust circles that are deeply built up here. Your ability to change direction, retool, and get a new strategy going is reduced, versus this organization where they have fewer people that have to go through fewer layers of hierarchy, and they are in a generally more trustful environment. They'll get more done. Now, I want you to think about this, right? So there's probably a natural upper limit to what is possible in all human trust circles, right? There's probably an upper bound. You could enter into a society. For instance, I like to talk about this as, in some of the Nordic countries, it's common for parents to take their newborn baby in a baby stroller and put the baby outside of a supermarket or a cafe, and while the parents go inside to enjoy a coffee or do some quick grocery shopping, and the baby sleeps outside in public unattended. Now, that is a society that has a very high level of trust for that specific situation, right? So it's a very specific topic, but it's built into the society that it's normalized. People are kind of, not concerned about things that you would be concerned about. For instance, if you wanted to go grocery shopping on Manhattan Island in New York, you would not leave your child unattended in Times Square, New York, in a baby stroller while you went in to get a coffee, right? That would be extremely dangerous and foolish. So the difference here is, what kind of culture are you in and what kind of trust circles do you have, right? So more things are possible. The situations are less complicated. You need to be less guarded in some situations than other ones, right? And other ones where you don't have those trust circles, you can't move so quickly. You can do less things, right? So how can we get from here to here, right? That's the real maneuver we need to work on. And that's what we call culture. And I've used Westrum here so to give us a meaningful way to think about that. A lot of people, unfortunately, are still stuck in a mode where they think, well, obviously, to get to that high trust culture, we just give everybody pizza, right? We give them pizza on Fridays and then we tell them how great we are and we'll get there. Probably not the best strategy, to be honest, right? This is not what people truly, deeply care about. They might care about it, but it's not the differentiator in terms of building those trust circles, right? What you really need to do is look at what Westrum talked about. So you can read a lot of research by Westrum to find out, but he's identified 3 types of cultures, right? And he's called them pathological, bureaucratic, and generative cultures. So in your pathological culture, it's an environment where, and Westrum talked about flows of information through an organization, right? So how easily does information flow through an organization? In a pathological organization, you can almost consider that information is used as a weapon, right? It is a resource for political wheeling and dealing. If you ever see in a meeting, somebody withholds a piece of information to make another person look bad, or to try to get ahead in their career or something like this, where information is really about advancing personal careers, that is a pathological trait. And when the organization does it, that's a pathological organization. Now, you can go into a bureaucratic one, and I think this bureaucratic is more common. Pathological I've run into, bureaucratic I've run into, generative as well. In my experience, bureaucratic is where most organizations average out. And of course, you have individuals promoting both cultures all quite frequently. It gets quite dangerous when a company itself moves into that pathological boundary, because then you simply cannot go through that company. You cap out at the size of company you can actually have, right? You can't go beyond a certain size. People won't change very quickly, but that's using information as a weapon. And then here in bureaucratic, it's actually about kind of following the rules, following the process. A lot of things that have been pushed for by just different things, like, let's say, scaled agile, right? So how do we push for following the process, following the rule? A really interesting example from this is, think about in an emergency situation. So for instance, the fire department knows that a building is about to collapse, and you can't get some of the police officers out of the building, because first the fire department needs to call the head office of the police department to let them know, and then they can trickle that information down, because that's the correct channel established by the process, instead of for instance, a generative culture where they would just get on the radio and talk to them directly, right? So that's a little bit of an understanding of bureaucratic. Is think about all the things where the fires keep burning and things get worse because we have to stick to the process, right? So it's processes over interactions kind of mindset. And in a generative culture, it's really a different situation, right? This is kind of a world where people really try to elevate one another, to stand on each other's shoulders. We don't simply shut down ideas. We reach out an arm and say, let me help you better your idea. Unfortunately, a lot of people have not experienced a generative culture. And once you do, you are immediately dissatisfied with, the status quo of the industry being generally bureaucratic with a lot of pathological traits in there. But once you really experience a generative culture, you never really are satisfied ever again with these two environments, because not only is it more humane and you can run farther, you just, yeah, I guess that's the real point, is you can just run farther as a company, right? So it's you can trust people in a more arbitrary way in a generative culture to say, well, I know these things can happen, right? So it's, you need fewer layers of management and interpretation and guiding and steering, because those trust circles and those alignment boundaries of we can share a common mission, and I don't have to worry about this person over here wheeling and dealing for promotion or trying to kick out somebody they don't like, and I don't have to worry about yeah, but the HR team has this policy, so we can't change our career framework or something like this, right? So in the generative culture, you can just really move quickly. So I think that's coming back here, right? So you do not necessitate a need for middle management. And by the way, middle management in a pathological organization versus middle management in a generative organization, your leadership pipeline in a generative organization is highly advanced. You are having middle managers working on elevating your leaders to always come up. So you always have a pipeline from inside. Pathological organizations, what I see is a lot of micromanagement and a lot of keep them under our thumb, keep them busy, don't try to understand the details, and things that burn people out, right? And that comes back to actually not just operational costs, that comes down to churn, right? So now you have churn. And the last thing there is really around agility. I think that's one of the key factors here. So if you're agility, and I don't mean agile agility, Scrum, Jira, I mean agility, how quickly can we set a new strategy and get the whole organization behind it, not just, hearts and minds, but even outcomes are aligned with that strategy. So this is the difference here. And this is why, things are different. You can have 10 managers in this org versus 5 in this one, and you can have the same headcount in the whole company, right? Even though your rings of management are greatly, expanded in generative and shrunk in pathological, what is possible in this company is significantly more with significantly less layers of interpretation, right? So I think that's the main thing here to think about is when you're thinking about how does culture influence my expense, consider these Dunbar numbers. And again, remember, this is not the org chart definition of I assign this individual contributor to this team and making some boxes on a chart somewhere and saying these people report to this person. This is actually about the way people work in reality, right? Because your org chart is very frequently not your reality, right? This is about how the so-called shadow organization makes itself work, right? So even if you don't have those managers, even if you say, I don't have them, usually your high performers end up filling those gaps. And you might not even recognize them in a pathological organization, which is why you can't really get over certain goals, right? So you actually have, a sort of blocker to reach goals, right? So you have a blocker to reach goals in a pathological organization because you cannot really recognize the people who are helping elevate and align the company, right? Because they don't have official titles. They might simply be good Samaritans in a bad situation, trying to keep people together, or trying to protect the group of people. So acting bureaucratically inside a pathological organization to do this. Again, that's not your org chart design. That is the shadow organization of the trust bonds people build throughout your company. And when you're in a generative organization, you can make really big teams of people and reduce the need for your shadow organization to not be the same as your factual tree diagram organization, right? Those can actually be more aligned and you don't have to pretend to have an organization that you don't really have. So I think that's the important thing here is it's about the interactions between the people and the kinds of trust circles they build. And that influences all of these. And that is how culture will influence your expenses. So it's really important that we build towards an organization with those generative cultures. So what can you do as a leadership team to help make sure you enter into that generative space and get away from that pathological one? And I think that's quite straightforward in Westrom's writings, right? He's described the cooperation between individuals, right? So we should have high cooperation. Messengers are shot in a pathological organization, right? So if you give bad information, you are the problem. If you give bad information, it's ignored. Or if you give, bad information, your messenger is actually explained to help other people understand the impact of that, right? So we work with our messenger. So if one group of people needs to talk to another, are we training that person and working with all the people in that space to understand that information is communicated correctly, they understand the mission? And that's really something we should do, right? So it's not simply assigned, go tell these people. It's actually, let's work together to make sure we get buy-in and we help everyone understand the necessity for that. Another one here is, about responsibilities, right? So I think this is one that feels intuitive for, organizational leaders at the very top, but maybe not for middle management, right? And especially not always line management, is responsibilities, right? So responsibilities are shirked. So if you have something like a production outage, you might say, that's, not something I care about because I'm working on a new feature. Or you might say, that's not something I care about because I'm a product manager. I'm not a developer. Production incidents are not my issue. I'm in sales. I don't care. And then risks are shared. We're one company, and if production is down, we stop making money. That influences all of us. And actually, there's something we can all do in this situation to figure that out, right? So that's risks are shared. bridging, discouraged, tolerated, and encouraged, right? So bridging, discouraged. I think this is a almost, linked into that messenger topic, right? So it's, are we working together cross-functionally? So if you have a development team who's not allowed to go and build bridges with the sales team, because there's just a reason, versus another one which is, we accept it but we don't like it. In fact, we'd really like to put in some middlemen to communicate and translate correctly. We don't want that. We're not going to train messengers to work together. We're just going to try to avoid that. And then you have bridging and courage, which is building that organization that lets you do so much more. And then look at another layer here. We have failure leads to scapegoating, right? Or failure leads to justice, and failure leads to inquiry. And I think a lot of people are worried about that inquiry. They think about the Spanish Inquisition. It's not what Westrom meant. So failure leads to scapegoating. We all try to point a finger for who to blame. Failure leads to justice. This is kind of in the middle there, trying to say, we have rules, your production went down, so you're not going to get a promotion or something like this. And then failure leads to inquiry. This is more about, asking, what are the things that led us towards that failure? What are the environmental factors? What are the people factors? What's the technological factor? How did this ecosystem of all the different complex things bring us to a failure, right? A much more mature and enlightened view of the world. And then this one is really nice. I think a lot of product officers would love this last one here, which is novelty, right? So novelty, I think, means innovation to a lot of people, or should mean innovation to a lot of people. So novelty is like, it's a generally new idea, right? So it's like, let's try something new. No, we will not try something new, right? It's just crushed immediately. Let's try something new. We can't do that because it's going to create this problem and that problem. And it's just, introducing all kinds of impediments to it, right? It's not shut down immediately, but it's, there's a lot of impediments and a lot of problems, and our organization doesn't know how to handle that, versus something implemented, right? So it's like, I want to use a new ticket system, right? So if I want to use a new ticket system in my team, maybe I can, right? Versus somebody saying, no, absolutely not. You're forbidden from doing that. Versus, no, there's going to be a lot of problems. It's not going to integrate with our reports. It's not going to do this or that, the other thing. And I think there's a fine line between these two, right? So are you negotiating the boundaries, and are you really being a generative partner here to figure out, how do we implement novelty in our organization? Or do we have all kinds of issues getting that done, right? So I think these are not individual things. They are interlinked to some degree, but I think it's quite clear, generative, if you want to see the financial impact of having that generative culture where you don't need all those layers of middle management, where you don't have to be slow to get things done, you need to build and cultivate that generative culture. So if you're a CFO and you don't want to see runaway middle management costs, and if you're responsible for revenue and you want to see that, or even profits, right? If you want to see that your gross margins are increasing, you want to make sure that you have a generative culture so you can avoid all of those issues that we talked about. And that's kind of the guide of what you need to be pushing, right? In every meeting, in every call, all your one-on-ones, you need to make sure that the way to get this stuff done happens, right? And you need to coach people, you need to mentor them. And if you can get all of that done, you will see, significant decrease in, your possible worst case expense, right? That's the pathological organization where everybody's, kind of out for themselves. And in general, you'll just run a healthier, more efficient organization that's probably, going to outpace what your competition can do with the same money.